Hello everyone, and welcome to the third episode of this series. Today we're going to have a closer look at motivation. A broad topic indeed, but if we look closer into the matter, once all of the more classical extremes are removed, we are actually only left with a few more basic and primal underlying factors. To get the most out of this episode, I would recommend that all the viewers who are new to this explanatory series to go back and view episode 1, Reality and Perception. Okay, let's get back to topic. Motivation. We all know of the classics. Desires. What the human body feels, which drives the most well-known forms of motivation. Hunger, reproduction, thirst, warmth, etc. These are all very biological animal needs and create a very cause and effect path to address. But as we know, the human mind is considerably more complicated and over time more subtle in how it generates the desire we call motivation. It is worth re-emphasizing that motivation, like all underlying subconscious mental factors, is a cumulative thing. Our thoughts and feelings, at any time, are made up of a multitude of mental factors, all competing and amplifying each other, or cancelling each other out, to have an end result which is not always easy to define in simple terms. This fact alone indicates how futile many modern claims to simplify mental health actually are. They try to pigeonhole something which is the sum result of innumerable factors. It's like saying 2 plus 6 plus 4 plus 3 equals 15, and therefore 15 is always made up of these four numbers. We all know this to be rubbish, yet a lot of people accept this type of logic to explain complex mental conditions. What we are looking at here are common underlying factors. We are looking at the numbers that go together to make the total sum. This helps us not only understand why we are acting as we are, it allows us to tweak the individual components to change the end sum, something that can never be done just looking at the end result, the 15 on its own. It is very valuable at this stage to notice how primal our most powerful motivators are in their form and strength. People have a bad habit of underappreciating how susceptible their minds are to the impulses and chemical signals of their biological bodies. The basic triangle of human existence is worth repeating because most adults either completely ignore or massively underestimate their effects. Mind, emotions, body. Most people will at least partially appreciate that emotions influence their thoughts, though most will grossly underestimate this. And some may even know that emotions are a massively chemical-driven exercise that is very closely linked with our body's daily functions. But the least amount of people appreciate the extent of connectivity of all three and the two-way relationship that all three also have. The body can influence the mind through emotions, if not directly, and that inversely the mind can influence the body. The lack of this understanding can best be shown by the amount of people who don't take care of their bodies, either through exercise or stretches or through the abuse of drugs and bad health practices. Let's take any emotional altering drug we drink or eat, be it drugs or coffee or etc. High concentrations of anything to any system should be a danger of instability. This should be obvious to everyone. Yet people ignore this and subject their chemical bodies and minds to the most nasty of shocks and strains. So what would drive people to do this to themselves? Now we have come full circle and are back to motivation itself. At this stage I will indulge my own generalization as a matter of practicality and define what I like to call the three basic excuses of the primal human. Laziness, self-gratification, or an excuse to react to primal desire, either good or bad, and self-justification. These are the pillars of the motivational mind, insofar that many of the mental states which we find ourselves in, and ask, where did that come from, can be traced back along its fundamental building blocks to a component of these three factors. These three alone, or in combination, can explain almost all actions of human interaction, and therefore the motivation behind them. Now the first two, laziness and self-gratification, are very biological and cover the most primal needs, mostly the second one. Laziness may seem out of place, but when viewed from a different angle, is a motivation in itself. It is a very primal one. Classically, looking back at human hunter-gathering roots, any action carried an underlying risk or danger. Curiosity did indeed quite often kill the cat. Due to the wide range of stock personalities, introvert, extrovert, and all those other fashionable terms used today, we get a wide variety of individuals and ensure that at least a good percentage have a mental framework favorable to their current situation, and therefore survive. This is to drive home the point that genetics, or indeed the body, has a large hardwired influence, as a persistent subconscious weighting on our thoughts and actions. This is not an excuse to be lazy or to justify unpleasant character traits. As stated in the first episode, all of us have the overriding counter to any subconscious tendency if we are aware and actively counter subconscious impulses. The point is to reinforce that motivation, like all mental conditions, is differently constructed and achieved by each individual differently. Some people may find specific types of motivation very easy. Others may have great difficulties. To judge an individual in comparison to another is to fundamentally misunderstand that each individual starts with a different starting block, and that their mental state is constructed differently. There is no real need to get too deep into laziness and self-gratification, as it is too heavily rooted in subtle subconscious and physical reactions that are subjective to the person and play out quite linearly. What I would like to focus on now is a third broad category, something mostly unique to humans and something that gathers considerably more importance the more that all existential necessities are met. For example, food, shelter, the basics. Self-justification. This is important because it is more than just a need for a physical thing or experience, which is broadly lumped into the category of self-gratification for this logical thread. It is the need to fulfill an abstract idea, to justify self-worth and our existence to ourselves. This categorization may be new to quite a lot of people who are inclined to lump everything into self-gratification, but it requires a special mention nonetheless, due to the pervasive, subtle, and constant effect that it has on most people's motivation nowadays. It also single-handedly helps broadly capture some of the most extreme of human behaviors and helps understand mentalities that would appear on the surface to be counterproductive and even self-destructive. A considerable amount of this can be tied back to a sense of self-worth. People with an inherent low sense of self-worth from a young age, either through circumstance or design, have a much greater need to self-justification later on, so as to satisfy themselves that this underlying subconscious deficit. This is not to say that the lack of self-worth is the only factor. When it comes to mental states, nothing generally is. It is to say how important self-image and having a defining role and purpose is to an individual, even to the point where maintaining the image would seem counterintuitive. At this point it is important to distinguish between self-worth, confidence, and arrogance. Arrogance is thinking you are better than everyone else. Self-confidence is knowing no one else is better than you. Many individuals who hold extreme, dogmatic, and rigid belief structures can generally be said to rely on these definitions and facades as part of their identity structure, and as such will quite readily act in a way that they may themselves know to be basically immoral, but they can simply not allow their identification with something which defines a cornerstone of their self-worth to be questioned and attacked. So how do you identify yourself? Do you think of yourself as coming from a particular country, culture, religion, being a member of an organization or movement, a sporting club, having a professional qualification or position? Do you generate pride and satisfaction from identifying yourself with these abstract identities? Do you get emotional or react irrationally to attacks to these institutions and ideas? Are you even aware that your reactions to perceived threats to the institution and idea is in such a way that you yourself would find distasteful in others? Now, this is not to say you cannot be proud of achievements that you yourself have contributed actively to. The question becomes, do you need identification to an external organization or idea to be proud of yourself? to have self-worth? Do you take ownership of the collective achievements of the group to feel good about yourself? Let's have a quick look at patriotism, religion, following a trend, an affiliation, or a very large sporting club. A strange combination? Not at all. All these abstract notions are institutions with a large following to which the individually, generally, has little influence on. There are two fundamental different ways to identify with each and every one. You can identify with the ideal of the institution or simply to the institution itself. The difference may seem subtle, like the difference between self-confidence and arrogance, but in reality this makes a large difference. People who gravitate to an ideal generally had one to begin with themselves, and are simply gravitating to an institution that caters to like-minded souls. These individuals can more tolerate any criticism to their institution, as they themselves hold this institution up to their own ideals. Someone who has little self-determining structure, moral ideals, etc., substitutes or takes on the ideals of that institution. As such, they have no other reference, and so vehemently defend the institution's unsavory elements as if it was an attack on themselves. Nothing makes an individual more blind and irrational than an attack on their self-belief structure. This goes just as well for atheists as well as religious types, or even every person for that matter. In the end, we all have to believe in something, be it science, anarchy, or anything else. Now let's make this perfectly clear. These institutions don't have to be large or ancient, like a religion. They could simply be a lifestyle, a fashion, a trend, anything that has an image or can be stereotyped. Other than the more basic animalistic needs and urges, our self-image is what motivates us. We are an idea. The idea has a routine. Maintaining that self-image requires effort and work. Even if we do not always willingly choose our persona and have been pressed into it due to social norms and cultural pressures, you are in one way or another working towards an ideal, if chosen or forced on you. Many people in Western society could easily achieve a sustainable minimum existence, which would provide enough food, shelter, and even a partner. What drives them to work harder is not only the desire for material wealth and comfort, or the sometimes muddled concept of financial security, heavily dependent on lifestyle. It is the idea of the social status surrounding these things. Social and cultural identification structure. Middle class, keeping up with the Joneses, your parents, all impart an underlying pressure to maintain an image, to be normal, to fit in. The best place to see the raw power of identity as a motivator is in teenagers. They have just matured into a mental framework where the powerful subconscious factor is fully active for the first time. They are still developing their identities, so are susceptible to swings of character and are guilty of following their chosen identity with youthful enthusiasm. After all, many will have a strong biological drive to become independent, and this requires a role, a purpose, an identity structure that justifies their actions to themselves. This alone also quickly clarifies some of the more self-destructive activities they undertake. You may wonder what motivates the action, but have a look at what they identify themselves as, and suddenly quite random actions could indeed have a specific purpose, even if it is an ill-advised one. This also helps to explain parents' bafflements in children taking different identity structures to their own. The biological drive to define self is very strong. This can be tied to a personal trait, need of comfort, to conform or rebel, and the selection of self-images can be heavily tied to the need of acceptance of one's peers, particularly for those with inherently low self-worth. It is no surprise that peers or social surroundings to teenagers play such a large role in helping them select an identity, or role that they want to define as their own. You may be stuck in the daily grind because you have to feed your family and provide for the future, but this puts more emphasis on your out-of-work activities to define who you are. And we wonder where people get the motivation to undertake some of the more crazy and extreme hobbies. Have a look, observe others, and see what they define themselves as. It will help you understand them and yourself. I hope this was again of some use to all, and don't forget to like and leave a comment to help give this series some momentum to hopefully reach a larger audience. Ciao for now.